Welcome to the Here's Waldo podcast, where we sit down with top visionaries and creatives in the video game industry. Together, we'll unravel their journeys and learn more about the path they're forging ahead. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Mintis, founder and CEO of Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique video game recruitment firm. This is the Here's Waldo podcast. In every episode, we dive deep into conversations with creatives, founders, and executives about what it takes to be successful. You can expect to hear valuable lessons from their journey and get a glimpse into the future of the industry. This episode is brought to you by Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique recruitment firm for the game industry. We value quality over quantity, transparency, communication, and diversity. We partner with companies, creatives, and programmers to understand the why behind their needs. We provide a white glove experience that ensures a win-win outcome. Before introducing today's guest, I want to give a big thank you to Chris Klimecki for introducing us. Today, we have Ben Kvalo with us. Ben is the founder and CEO of Midwest Games, the regionally focused video game publisher that aims to change where games come from by supporting underrepresented and overlooked developers in regions starting in the Midwest of the United States. Dedicated to creating entertainment and games that resonate with diverse audiences and cultures, Ben draws from his more than 12 years of industry experience. This includes contributions to over 100 game titles and over 50 films, encompassing some of the entertainment industry's most popular and successful franchises. Let's get started. Thanks for being on the show, Ben. I want to also give you a shout out for being a LinkedIn top voice and reconfirm with everybody that your name is like koala with an O.
Like koala bear, but with an O at the end. And thank you. Yeah, that was a big surprise when I was, I guess that list suddenly came out of nowhere. And, because I've just been doing my thing and, trying to spread the good word about underserved developers in regions like the Midwest. And so that was kind of like, reaffirming that this message is resonating in a major way.
It is, yeah. That's the perfect segue. Tell me about Midwest Games.
Yeah, so Midwest Games, you said one of our big talking points, changing where games come from, but our big bet is that great games can come from anywhere, and we need to better marry up where talent are, because talent is everywhere, with opportunities, and opportunities are not. And so if we can do that, I think our big bet is we are going to find more innovative, interesting titles all over the place in the Midwest and outside of it. We are talking to developers from Mexico, from South America, from Israel, from a number of places in Africa, and there's talent all over the place with really interesting projects, and ultimately they're not supported in the kinds of ways that they need to find success. With 99% of games that come out being indie, those need more support, and they just don't have it enough, especially in these regions like the Midwest. And so we're hoping that we can build on some of that and help support folks, help fund, help market, and then help provide services like localization, QA, and production support.
What inspired you to start the company?
I mean, it's probably like a chip on my shoulder, being from Wisconsin originally, going out into the job market and ultimately not being able to do what I wanted to do where I was from. And so I left, almost 13 years in California. I worked at 2K, Blizzard, Netflix on the films end. I helped build Netflix games from the ground up, and, saw all these incredible opportunities in California and wondered, why is there not more in the Midwest? Chicago is the third largest city in the country. A lot of the talent that I see in California in Washington and Texas, which makes up 67% of the video game industry, uh, is from the Midwest, is from other regions. So why is it that so few places have the majority of games and games development and games output? And so that was the thing that kind of just was in the back of my head for a long time. And finally, I got to the point from an experience perspective where I just had seen a lot in the industry and been involved at every different level, AAA to indie, every different business model type, having like seen subscription model front and center with what we were doing at Netflix, on the mobile end of things, that I was like, okay, well, what if we try? Like, what if we build something? What if we put our flag in the ground and really try to make this a real thing in the region? Like, will we find the developers? And the overwhelming answer to that is yes. We have more pitches than we know what to do with from developers, and so many people that need support, and just a strategic view of how to go to market. So we're really excited what we saw, but a lot of it just came from the fact that I happen to have the experience in this area and I'm from that region. So I noticed it and then I was like, well, why isn't there more? And I'm just trying to go do it now.
I think your brand really resonates with people because you have this personal story that really correlates and the experience.
Yeah, well, it's a unique opportunity because like very rare in life do you have like this personal like passion and like avenue, and then also holy crap, like there is this obvious need and gap. And so from a business perspective, even if I wasn't from the Midwest, it makes sense. But the fact that I can marry these two things and do something I'm just so incredibly passionate about, is just it's one of those once in a lifetime type of things. And so I just had to do it and leave Netflix, which was really hard to leave because it's Netflix and it's an incredible place, incredible culture. But ultimately, it was the opportunity to build something from and for myself that I was really excited about.
And I think Netflix would always hire you back, especially now. Not that that's the route you're going to go, but I feel like that's so important to think about when you're starting. Like, will this make me a candidate that will get hired at a big company or whatever company you want to work at in the future? Yes,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I mean, I would hope that they hire me back. They didn't want me to leave, so that was a good sign, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good sign. So your mission is fostering innovation and accessibility in regions often overlooked by the mainstream gaming industry. How do you think the mainstream gaming industry can improve at this?
I mean, it's one of those things that they can't help themselves. Because we all do the same thing. You end up working with the people you trust and know and the people around you. And so it just becomes a cycle of the same things happening. So I think it's forcing yourself outside of a comfort zone that you know. And the industry just needs to do more of that and also just needs further investment into the areas that are actually going to be the most innovative places. Like a lot of the great new ideas come from indie developers, folks that might be a single person studio. And so, and to see that it is a profitable endeavor by having the best creative and leaning into those areas, that's where the biggest amount of money is compared to trying to de-risk every single thing, which is what a lot of publishers do, which I get, like it makes sense, but you can't de-risk creative. Like that's not something that you can truly do, if you want to be innovating and always pushing things forward. And so my hope is that more folks lean into those areas, knowing that means a higher upside on the back end.
That makes sense. For companies that are interested in working with Midwest Games, it sounds like you have a really big interest to sift through already. But what do you provide and how do you differ from other publishers? I know you touched on it a bit.
Yeah, so in some ways, we're similar to traditional publishers. We provide funding support for, the production and development of the game. We provide marketing, PR, community support, and go-to-market strategy. We supply kind of all of the connection points to the platforms that are needed, which are vast and they get more complicated every time you add a new platform. And then we offer support services, things like quality assurance, localization, production support. But then if you need an art vendor, we can connect you with those. Whatever you need to go to market, like we can come up with some of those things if we end up partnering together. Now, how we differentiate in a lot of ways is how we're approaching things. You have the really large scale, businesses that invest, 75, $100 million or more. And what has pretty much dried up is a space of 10 to $50 million. And then we're in this smaller space below that that just needs greater support. But a lot of times, folks will just do the spray and pray method where they'll take a lot like the money and but spread it across really thin across a ton of titles, not give them a ton of support. But whereas we want to give support, so how we're even structuring our deals is that it's incentivizes a long-term view and a long-term partnership with the developers that we're working. We have an escalator clause that gives a much greater incentive on the back end for developers that if they hit, they are the ones that win the most, which allows them to grow, allows them to be, build a sustainable independent studio over time. And we get more than our return. Everyone can win in these situations. And so our structure is slightly different. Some people do it similar and are challenging some of the traditional models a little bit more, and that we're actively investing in their IP. So we ask for a minority piece of developers' IP because we want to support it. And we want to continue to push it forward. And we see that as a piece that brings us together and creates a healthy friction. I think there are good things about friction that pushes both parties forward. And having that kind of partnership is really key. And we are in a place that nobody else is. And so just by being there, we're active in the ecosystem, we're helping to sponsor game jams, local events. We're at the local events. We're almost always the only publisher at these events. And we want to provide resources and advice as much as we want to, work on our own business as well. Because sometimes it's supporting a developer so that they can get to their next step. And then maybe 5 steps down the line, they actually partner with us on something else. But we have that connection long term. So we're just always trying to look through a long term lens with what we're doing.
I like it. That's kind of parallel to recruiting in a way. Like people need help, right? And you help them, and then you help them. They have a good experience. 5 years later, you hire for them. So it's kind of the same ecosystem, just a little bit different lens. So you have so many pitches and you have to make a lot of decisions all the time about who you're going to invest in and who you're not. What makes you feel as certain as you can be that you're making the right decision on a pitch? What do you look for?
I mean, you're never certain in this business. You have to be willing to take bets and willing to take risks, and willing to take bets on partners that you believe in and you trust, and sometimes you have to say no to even when they have every other factor because maybe your Q1 is too busy and that's when their game releases, and that's the challenge of it. And so I think what gives me confidence with the games that we sign is the willingness to work together, to collaborate, to take feedback, to also push back on us on things. Again, I spoke about the healthy kind of tension or healthy friction. Like that's good. Like it is about saying, hey, neither of us is right all the time. In fact, that's rarely the case, right? Like it's how do you continue to grow? How do you continue to progress forward as there's obstacles throughout the process? And so partners that are willing to invest in that, and that they are trying something that maybe is a little bit different. If you just have something that's exactly the same as something else, like, is that going to really go in market? And so it's like, what is that thing that gives the game a chance? Because no matter what, most games fail. But if you have something about your title that gives it a chance, for a audience to latch onto, like those are the games that I look for the most. Is what is that thing? Like what is that big bet that you're doing? I look at it like, you know, with how when I was at Netflix we did film, like we didn't have the budgets that these big film companies had, and so we had to take big bets on certain things, and sometimes it worked out and sometimes it didn't. But that's the reason why something like Bird Box, which is a film I worked on, took off in a major way because we took a big bet with blindfolds, and blindfolds was the thing that ended up taking off, and people were putting blindfolds on all around and doing this Bird Box challenge and other things. And so you just have to sometimes take big bets on things. And it's like, does the content have something like that that could stand out in the market?
How do you think people can balance standing out too much? Because I hear so many people say, oh, I was too early. If I had been here 5 years later, the market would have gotten it. So what's that balance of being different, but not too different that people don't get it?
I mean, it's a lot. There's luck to it, and the people that say, "Oh, if it would have been 5 years, who knows?" Right?
Yeah.
It's you just never truly know. Some of this is luck, like, and what I see it as is, okay, how do you, knowing that luck is a piece of this, how do you increase your odds as much as you possibly can?
Yeah.
It's like if someone wants to go gamble. Well, if you go to the one that statistically probably has the best odds and get really good at that, so that you improve your odds the most out of it. And so that's really kind of like how I look at it. It's just what are the things we can actually control? Let's be really, really good at those things, so that increases our chances. I come from an operations background, so how do we operationally be really sound so that we have smooth launches, we are able to best put something out into the market? I think that increases our odds a little bit, and sometimes a 1% change can make all the difference. And so it's
Yeah.
all about the little things at times, and just increasing those odds as much as you can, knowing you're never going to have full control over this. And guess what? It's not any different in the folks in the indie space than in the big AAA space. There are massive failures in those areas because as much as they can spend $50 million on marketing, that doesn't guarantee success.
Yeah.
And so it's ultimately control what you can control. And some of this is, you have to leave it up to some kind of odds, but that's also why I really think that more publishers and brands need to lean in with their brand and build communities that care about their brand, and they have a purpose in the world. I think that's a big thing I talk to my team about is what is our purpose in the world at Midwest? And our purpose is to ultimately support those that are under supported, and to be an ally to so many people that don't have the voice. And I feel like you can very openly benefit from a business perspective from that, but you have to be authentic and you have to be true to that at all times. It's the brands that break that ultimately like do irreversible harm to themselves. And so if we ever make a mistake, we have to be upfront, have to be honest, and we have to be like transparent and vulnerable, and be human with some of these things. And if you're able to build a brand that embraces that, people want to follow you, people want to embrace that, and again, that just increases your chances of success because people actually care about it. But you have to always be authentic.
Yeah, I would agree. That's so important. But it is attractive to people if you're real and you're not just kittens and rainbows all the time. I saw this
Yeah.
studio, I think last week, maybe you know the name of it, but it was two founders and they made a video about why they had to shut their game down and what went wrong and what went right. And then they posted it on LinkedIn. And it was amazing to see, like, here are my mistakes. And I think the community really rallied around that. And I love
Yeah.
that. Totally a different approach, but it's really real and really honest.
Well, and that's what people want.
Totally.
We're in a world where, so many things are hard to tell what is real, what isn't. And when you're just completely transparent and say, "Hey, you screwed up in like I screwed up in these ways, we screwed
With my
up in these ways."
pricing.
It's
Yeah.
just like might make some folks in PR cringe at times, but like I think there's a long-term benefit of doing that both externally, but also internally with your employees. We've just gone through such a span of massive layoffs. I just wish we were able to have more discussions openly. And everyone wants that. They want the visibility into what's going on, and we need to treat more people like adults that can handle it and can actually help the situation. And hopefully that happens over time.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a rough layoff time. I think there's a lot of new companies that are going to come out of it, and people will
Yeah.
change the way that they do things, which will hopefully be a positive. But it's a big shakeup for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. Like, with challenges also comes opportunities, right? And that's how you make the most of it. Now, some aren't going to see that, which is really tough. But some are going to go off and build the next thing. It's why during down markets, actually some of the biggest best companies ever created were created during down markets. And also just the amount of talent that is out there experienced in games that now is like, you know what, I'm sick of these big companies treating me like I'm just a cog and in the scheme of things. They go off and they're going to create some companies that are going to challenge it, and we're just at a point in the kind of the history of games. If we think about how old games is, what, 40, 50 years old, it's kind of like a disruption time. So many of these companies are like 20, 30 years old. And that's about the time that if a company doesn't innovate continually, they get disrupted by something else that's new out there. And so we're at this really interesting mark that I think it's about time there's some disruption and challenges to it. And some of these big companies will adjust and see that and go, okay, yeah, good point. And some won't. If history's taught us anything, it's that the next big one is sitting dormant. It hasn't been created yet, about to be created, and is going to suddenly really change things.
Yeah, I'm excited. I feel cautiously optimistic. And Jordan Mazer had a great post the other day too, another LinkedIn top voice if any of the listeners don't follow, but just about the growth that happened during COVID and how much of a boom it was, and how although there are cuts, we're still in a much bigger place than we've ever been. So I think that's important to remember too. There's still huge growth, even with the cuts.
I mean, we're just at such a weird place overall because there's so many things that have gone into all of this. Like, was it COVID? Was it COVID hiring? Was it like, we still are normalizing post this really unique and historic time period, you know, in things that we never have gone through in a digital era like we are right now. And so things are being figured out, and we don't know what the new norm is. The dust has not settled yet, and so I think there's a lot of opportunity before the dust settles to change some things. And hopefully people are looking at it as an opportunity to do better business practices and more focus around sustainability so that these kinds of cuts like don't become a commonplace. And historically they have been a bit in how the model of games has been made, especially in the AAA space, because unless you have another project right after your release, suddenly you have a bunch of folks that don't have a true role unless you're live service. But even then, that's become so specialized that there's still a large portion of studios that suddenly don't have something unless there's another thing immediately lined up. And so we just have to look at how we're doing it, how we can better collaborate across different developers, which some developers are doing. There's one in Madison, Lost Boys, that
Yeah.
that's what they do is they really work across so many different, and they help support so many different studios on so many different games. It's a really interesting model that can be very successful.
Interesting. So if they roll off project A, then they're immediately able to be deployed. They already have project B lined up, so to speak.
They might be working on ABC together. Like, it depends, and they're able to kind of fluctuate their resources accordingly. And not everyone wants to be a support studio. But those kinds of models, are becoming much more prevalent, especially in AAA. A
Yeah.
single studio cannot do everything these days. You have to have multiple studios working on something. It's just too big, too complex. So all of that is becoming, somewhat norm, but how do we do this across the industry in even better ways? And it's going to force collaboration. So there's going to be some interesting partnerships at some point.
Yeah, and probably more interesting mergers and acquisitions, I would guess.
Oh yes, well that's increasing tremendously. What is it like? 2019, there was like 3.5 billion in M&A, and then last 2022 it was I think 122 billion or something around that. And so the increase in the game space has gone way up. Now it's going to be interesting to see like what are the 2023 final numbers. Does that trend continue over time? Obviously, the kind of numbers with Activision Blizzard included being 69 billion of it, like boosts things quite a bit.
Yeah.
So it's just a fascinating like thing to continue to study. But I think consolidation of the games industry is just like that's what's happening. Like big folks are getting bigger, middle folks are disappearing. Anything that's been successful is being acquired or being partnered up with something, which I just think creates a lot of opportunity in the indie space for new things to emerge, but with a slower pace. Like I always look at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, A, because I love it, because I grew up with it, big Raphael guy. Uh, but also because if we think about it, they had a slower pace of things. They were a black and white comic at one point, and then they have built, and they just now recently had their biggest piece of content they've ever put out with their animated film and their new game, Shredder's Revenge. And so that IP has been built up over time, and you can from a small indie space build that and build it sustainably. Whereas if you're in AAA, if it's new IP, it has to succeed from day one,
Yeah.
or it's a failure.
AAA is so expensive these days, and yeah, high stakes. And there's so many games that are coming out that have really high Metacritic scores, right? There's so many games in general to choose from. So
Yeah, well, what's interesting is there's less AAA, AA games overall, but they're higher quality. At least in this year, 2023, maybe is an abnormality, but at least this year, like there's just so much competition in that space, even though there's less total titles. But that's why they're the 1%. Like 99% are indie, and then the 1% are these few titles that make it through AAA that get so much budget. But I think on Steam, I think the stat is like that the 1% makes about 75% of the revenue on Steam, whereas like, indie is about 24 to almost 25% of the revenue. So that is really skewed in a really tough way. But obviously the games industry is so big, even the 25% is a giant, giant number.
yeah, it is. What do you think indie games can do? I mean, you have this threshold indie. Besides partnering and having you publish their game, what can they really do to break above the line?
You have to cut through. And the best known way to cut through right now is to have a publisher that knows how to do that. There's just not that many publishers in the scheme of things, and not many publishers that actually know how to cut through either. And it's really difficult to cut through, even if you know how to know all the platform like connections and everything that's needed. Even then, it's still really really tough. And so, with over 13,000 games coming out every year, it's just incredibly hard to cut through. And there's only going to be more games in the future with with uh, the accessibility to engines, the ability to do more with less technical skills.
Yeah.
Um, there's only going to be more. So it's how do you partner up with somebody that can cut through? And I think what's interesting is it doesn't have to be a publisher. Now, I'm an advocate of a publisher. Obviously, I'm a little biased in this,
But oh yeah.
um, but it could be a YouTuber. It could be a Twitch streamer. It could like there are many other ways, that could be routes towards success, that we should be trying these more often and seeing. And a couple folks on YouTube have created publishers as well. Big Mode being one, from Video Game Donkey. So there's some of that is happening, and we should explore more of it, and see what happens with that because obviously that's a superpower. If they have an audience already built in, and a lot of these indie games to be successful, maybe like need to sell 100,000 units or less. Um, if they already have an audience that there's millions that they're immediately speaking to, there's a potential route to success for that. So it's how do you cut through? And there's so many different ways you could go about it. It's just publishing is one of the most proven ways of going about it.
Makes sense. Well, I see a lot of people building up big communities on Discord too, and releasing and getting feedback
Yeah.
and
Well, that's how you go to the community directly, right? And the folks that do it really well and authentically, and transparently, they do really, really well. There's a couple of indie games that I follow on Discord, and I just love every time they have a new like improvement update. Like, awesome! I jump back into that game again. And so it's a smart approach, but it's not for everyone. Not every game makes sense for this. So you also have to match your social platforms to what's going to work, ultimately for your game type, for your audience.
yeah. I want to talk about your time at Netflix. And before we go into it, can you share a bit about Netflix Game Studios? Because I think people have different ideas about what it is.
Yeah, I mean, Netflix games right now, obviously we've all seen what they're doing, or a lot of us have seen what they're doing. They're on their mobile device. If you go on the Netflix app on your mobile device, it's usually like the first row all the way to like the fifth row or something like that. I'm not sure anymore where exactly they place it. Mine is the first row. Uh, and there's 70 plus games, some really incredible ones, that are on there and all over the place. From hardcore games to very like super casual games, or hyper casual games, cozy games, puzzle games. There's a lot on there. So Netflix games is doing that, and then they've also released oxen free to streaming as well. And so and they I believe announced that was a test that they're working on. So they're clearly doing a bunch in the game space, which is super super exciting for me. I think again, I have a bias because I really believe in the Netflix culture and what they're about and how they build things, and what they've done in the film space. And if you look at and I was on the film side before I went onto the game side, but you look at how we consume films now. It used to be that if it was a direct to DVD or direct to streaming movie, it was considered not very good. And Netflix changed that perception where it doesn't have to go to theaters first to be good. A lot of great films go to theaters first, but frankly, a lot of bad films go to theaters too. And so Netflix has helped to change that perception. And I think the same thing could potentially happen with mobile, where mobile is considered, a place that like cheap games or free to play or like, casual games are. When in reality, it doesn't have to be that. That's just kind of how the model has worked best. But now with subscription, you can put some games that are hardcore on Steam onto mobile, and that's really interesting. And that could change. They could change perceptions around what is a mobile game like, and I think it just moves into where the whole industry is going is eventually it's like any game, anywhere, any device, at any time. Like that's the future. So it's exciting to see Netflix in the space. Obviously, being part of it at the beginnings, and, up until when I left in May was really really exciting. And they've acquired some studios. They're building some new studios. They're just doing a ton that is really exciting.
Absolutely. Tell me about working in film at Netflix and leaving games to do film and what you learned in that transition.
Yeah, so um, I I joined in the very early days of films. We could all fit in one meeting room at one point, which was super exciting. So I was hired on to really help build infrastructure and help to think about how do we scale this thing. Netflix is a scale business, doing a ton of things, and so much content out because they're trying to entertain the world. And so you need a lot of content to entertain them. And so uh, thinking about how you scale that to create quality, and be able to do more with less is an incredibly complex challenge. So my time there was exciting because like it challenged my problem solving brain like in ways that I could never imagine. And it widened my perspective to think about how we entertain the world and where entertainment comes from. And so it was just such an incredible like learning moment. I grew so much as a person, as an employee. They really emphasize vulnerability and having the courage to say the things you need to say, and also to say when you're wrong. Say, hey, I need to improve. I need to grow in these areas. And so I was able to grow so much, just as a human at that place, which was incredibly rewarding, which is why like I have the bias towards it because like I feel like you almost want to give back in some ways. And how I look at it is just okay, how do I take all the things that I loved about that and bring it into a new company? Well, also like it wasn't perfect. No place is perfect. And so how do I make my place even better for our employees? And how do I enable their best work by removing barriers and things like that? And so Netflix, it'll always have a special place in my heart.
What do you really want to take from Netflix? Like what in terms of core values and in terms of things you want to implement in your own business, it sounds like vulnerability is a theme and will continue to be a theme. What else are you thinking about for your own company?
Yeah, it is treating folks the right way, treating them like adults and having honest, open feedback. Um, you know, not having to always be right just to survive or look the best or get the promotion or anything like that. It's really what I took away was that feedback matters, and why it matters is because the best relationships I built at Netflix were the ones that actually had the most feedback. Maybe didn't start off in the best place.
Yeah.
I have an incredible like sort of with a coworker of ours where we butted heads all the time, uh, and and we didn't see eye to eye, but we kept giving each other feedback. We kept having those one-on-one discussions, and we grew to the point that not only did we get to a really positive place, but a place of a ton of respect and trust, because we knew when either of us said something, we trusted what was happening because we had gone through the process of getting each other's perspectives and knowing where things were coming from. And sometimes when you're in operations and versus like creative,
Yeah.
you just have two different lenses at times, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's where, like, even as I spoke about earlier, like healthy friction, like that's okay because you can get to a really good place. And all of that is positive. But you have to invest and you have to be willing to be vulnerable, be wrong at times, call somebody out. Like, I don't think you were being your best self in this situation. And if you're able to get through the awkward moments, it unlocks this really rewarding place. And that's that's what I took from Netflix quite a bit. And so I'm much more direct. My mom doesn't like that as much because when when her salsa wasn't very good, and I gave her feedback on that. She didn't enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm pretty direct too. No, I think it's good to know what people are feeling. I had Arena Pereira on my podcast from Unleash Games, and she talks about creating a psychologically safe environment where you can say, it's okay to call me out right here if you don't agree with the thing that I'm saying, and it really builds a better culture and you can understand what people are thinking. So just have to do
And
it.
I took a lot from like even Reed Hastings. I didn't get many interactions. The business got so big, but
Yeah.
he often talked about how he didn't want to make any decisions. Like he wanted the employees to make decisions on things. And so that definitely is something that resonates with me is like I want the people closest to the situation with the most context to make the decisions, not me who is two steps away. Even in my small company, I'm still away from a lot of these things because I'm focused on my areas, and I should be informed captains on those areas. But somebody in marketing or production, um, they should be the ones making decisions in those areas. And so I want to always instill and ensure that like that is prioritized, that they're informed captains in those areas.
That's kind of a big theme on my podcast. I hear so many people say hire smart people in their areas of expertise and then get out of the way.
Yeah, let them do. Like I'll provide feedback if I have thoughts on something, but I never want it to be like, oh, because Ben
Said
gave
it.
feedback, we have to make a change. We have to do that. It's like, no, like that's just a piece of perspective that you should take into account. And you should also take into account, maybe the community manager that gave a perspective, the PR manager that gave a perspective, maybe an advisor that we have that gave a perspective. All of that is really good information to ultimately make an informed decision.
Can you talk to me about your adventure to get funding? Funding stories are always fun.
Funding was a whole new world that I had never experienced before, and getting to the close of our round was exhausting. Yeah, I mean, people literally write books about just going through the process, the mental drain, everything. But really, like it's networking on steroids, and you're trying to almost speed date in some ways of get to know, build a relationship with somebody so much so that they would trust giving money to you. And I think if you can if you can build trust and show vision and be authentic and be transparent, I think it gives you a better chance. It's just it's a tough market right now, and it's just an interesting times in investment scene. But overall, like I looked at it as no matter what, I'm gonna learn a lot and grow and improve. And I sure as heck have. I have really grown as a person, but just my knowledge of this whole world that I kind of knew about, but never had dove deep into. But I learned best when I just jump into something, and it was the best thing possible to just jump into it. I've met so many incredible people that are making huge differences in the world, in this space. It's really been a rewarding like journey as much as like just worrying about are we going to get there, are we not, like is a very painful, and like how to measure it all out. And it's like a balancing act. You're just constantly balancing everything that's going on and trying not to fall off whatever thing you're walking.
It's like entrepreneur life summed up in a sentence. If you could go back in time and tell yourself one thing about fundraising that you didn't know when you started, what would you say?
One thing that I didn't know when I started, it is it's going to always take longer than you expect, which is what a lot of people say anyways. But you know the the stress that comes with it just don't let it get you down at any point. Like it's not it's not worth it at times, and you just get so low at times. And the same, as you're low, the next moment you're just really high because of something else that went right.
Yeah.
And it's don't stress on some of the small things. Expect that most people are going to say no, and that's okay. And it's kind of like finding a job that you like. If you're one of your jobs, or especially when you're early in your career, all you need is one yes. Don't worry about all the no's. You need one yes. And so I tell that to a lot of folks that you know mentor or advise around job searching as well. It's like, yeah, it's tough, especially right now. But all you're looking for is that one yeah, and it's gonna feel so good when you have it. Just keep looking for that. Don't focus on the things that are now behind you that are no's. And so it's the same with investing, and it's funny how similar that is in a lot of ways.
Maybe dating too.
Yeah, and dating. Yes, so you just need one yes.
Yeah. Are there any teasers you can give us or things to look forward to from Midwest Games?
Yeah, I mean, I can tease that we've signed another game besides Rah Rah Boom. So Rah Rah Boom is our first game we signed. Is from Guiley Games, a studio in Cincinnati, Ohio. And we're negotiating around 5 other titles. So there's going to be a lot of news
Oh,
coming up. Hopefully soon. We haven't decided when we're going to announce certain things. But stuff is happening as you can imagine. This is inevitable. We're literally in the business of signing titles, but we're very excited to be able to talk more about some of the titles and some of the developers we get to support um, coming up here. I guess that's a little bit of a teaser.
exciting. Yeah, we'll follow along. I have one last question. And before I ask it, I want to point people to your website, midwestgames.com. Let's pretend you've won, it's not game of the year because you're publishing publisher of the year, some big, big award.
Mm.
Who would you give a shout out to professionally? Who has been the biggest influence or some of the biggest influencers on your career?
Well, I mean, my team. If we get to that point, it's our team that got us there. It's definitely not me. It's the folks that I've been fortunate enough to bring in and have trusted to work for me or work with me, partner with me. But then like some of it has to be the developers that again also agreed to partner with us, trust us, and then there's been a couple just like key folks in my life that have really helped get me to where I am. And there's the person that first, or the two people that first gave me a chance, Brooke Grabian, who now is the head of people at Bitcraft.
Yeah.
She was the first recruiter to talk to me in the game space, and so gave me a chance, and then the hiring manager was Kate Kellogg, who's now the CEO of studios at EA. So those were the first two that gave me this opportunity. And so I'll forever be grateful. Plus, they've just been incredible mentors throughout. And then, uh, there's just been so many since then, just in each step. Megan Anderson at Netflix was a huge mentor to me, bringing me on, taking a chance on somebody in the game space for a film's role. And so like the people that like took risks, but like that's my message always to hire managers: take risks, because like I'm a perfect example of a bunch of risks that people took that I hope they think paid off in the long run. And so it's those are the kinds of people, and I could name probably like 10 to 20 more as well, but those are some keys.
That's really sweet that Brooke hired you. I love that you remember your first recruiter too.
Of course. Oh my God, I could never forget her.
Oh,
We still talk too, so that's the other thing. And now she's in the investor side, which is it's so funny how this all works.
yeah. No, everyone comes around. I chatted with a guy today, and his co-founder is someone I tried to hire 7 years ago. And the person that he worked with at his last company, I hire for their company. I'm like, okay, everything's connected here. So important games lesson. Leave on a high.
Always focus on the long-term relationship. Like, this is not a short game. Like, this is all about the long term, and it always comes full circle at times. And so always focusing on that. You just never know what's going to be out there, and so make sure it matters to you.
Yeah. We've been talking to Ben Kvalo, founder and CEO of Midwest Games. Ben, tell us where people can go to contact you, follow your company.
I mean, midwestgames.com from a website perspective, and you can follow us on all of our socials as well. Usually it's Midwest Games, because that's a little bit of a generic name. We didn't quite get it across every social, so sometimes it's Midwest Games Co., which is technically our full name, Midwest Games Company. And then LinkedIn, last name is spelled Kvalo. I'm the only Ben Kvalo in the world, so it's easy to find. That is where I'm most active by far, and would love, always enjoy followers. I try to respond to all of my messages, well, at least the ones that aren't spam on there. But I try to respond to all. So if you do message me, I'm on there as well.
Love that. Thank you for being on.
Thanks so much for listening to the show this week. To catch all the latest from Here's Waldo, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. We'll see you next time.